Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the From the Periphery Podcast. Today I'm joined by two guests, two Sudanese commentators, to talk about the recent developments in Sudan, most importantly, what's described as the liberation of Khartoum. But we're also going to get into more details and more of an in-depth discussion about the situation in Sudan, the discourse, and the sort of political trajectory, let's say, of the country, which has been through 2 years of war and experiencing one of, if not the worst humanitarian crisis. And despite that, there's very little coverage and analyses or that people are sharing or doing. And so, yeah, that's today's episode. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Sada, you can go first.
My name is Sarah. I am known as BS on Blast across the interwebs, and I have been advocating for Sudan online for the past decade, maybe. Um, yeah, that's it.
Hi, sorry for my coughing fit. I'm Dallia Abdelmoniem. I'm Sudanese, and I currently work in political analysis and civil society advocacy for Sudan. And I consult with a Sudanese think tank, and I am this consortium of Sudanese civil society activists, and we try to push the Sudan agenda as far as we can, hitting a lot of walls along the way, but we keep pushing.
Yeah. Thank you to both for coming on. I followed both of your works for years now, and you do incredible work, and it's very much so needed because otherwise there's just very little discussions and coverage of Sudan. Definitely not enough compared to the magnitude of what's been happening for the last 2 years, but even before that, with the revolution, with the coup, with like we're sitting today talking because a week ago there was a very rare good news from Sudan, which is that the rapid support forces were sort of kicked out of the city, that the Sudanese army recaptured the city from the capital, Khartoum. And so maybe we should start with just that. If you could talk more towards the recent developments, what's being described as the liberation of Khartoum, the joy that people are experiencing, that we've seen this footage of Zalghutas, of people celebrating. Maybe also you could share your reflections in this moment as well. Yeah.
Dali, you want to go first?
Okay. It's a huge moral victory. There's no doubt about that. In essence, simply because the RSF has been controlling Khartoum since day one of the wars. It's been nearly 2 years. And to see the videos of those civilians who stayed for the past 2 years in Khartoum under, the horrible circumstances that they've been living in and emerge happy. I can't, I don't think anyone has the heart to tell them why you're celebrating. But at the same time, I have this note of caution, as in, this is just one city. Yes, it is our capital, but it is one city. And the RSF still has very much a stranglehold over the whole western region of Darfur. And they have history in that region. And the battle for el-Fashir is still ongoing. The civilians who are besieged in the IDP camps, they are suffering in regards to access to water, to food, to safety. I mean, there was a recent UN report, more than 800,000 children are in el-Fashir and, under constant bombardment, under constant conflict. And so I tempered my excitement and my joy, but I can do that because I'm not in Sudan. I managed to leave Sudan 2 weeks after the war broke out. And so, but I don't begrudge anyone who was celebrating it. But but again, like I said, it's not over yet. It's just one battle in this conflict that has fallen for for the army. And I am no fan of the army, which is, I think, as Sarah very well knows as well. It's become very much a polarized scenario. You're either with us or against us, as in you're either pro RSF or pro SAF. To be objective or to remain neutral is just not accepted in any shape or form. But yeah, I mean, Khartoum saw the worst of the fighting, saw the worst of the destruction, the worst of the violations so far that we know of. I mean, there's still reports coming out of all different areas. I mean, Sudan is a huge country, and Khartoum city is just one of many. So that's my take on what's the past 2 weeks, the past 10 days or so news. But it was a good Eid, I would imagine, because 2 years ago we had no Eid because the war had broken out, and now for some people it's a celebration, a time for celebration. So happy for them.
Yeah, I think I can't disagree with anything that he said. It's a huge victory for, first and foremost, for the people of Khartoum who were trapped in the city for the last 2 years. I think we cannot begin to imagine the horror they've experienced over the last 2 years. And right now we are starting, like with the recapture of Khartoum by SAF, we're starting to see just we're getting the tip of the iceberg in terms of what people have experienced. If you look at the reports of the freed hostages of the RSF, the people who were in RSF detention centers or in Soba prison, like the things that they've experienced, that's just, the tip, like I said, the tip of the iceberg of what people have been going through over the last 2 years. So no one can take away that victory from them, that celebration from them. I think the issue is in, I would say, the international community's reaction to the liberation of Khartoum, which is that the war is over. I think for people of Khartoum to say the war is over, you can argue that for them the war is over, right? The RSF has been kicked out, they've been liberated, and now their life is going slowly back to normal. They can now start to think about healing and rebuilding, but that's not the case, like Dallia said, for the rest of the country, particularly Darfur and Kordofan, where the RSF is still very much entrenched. And I think today I saw, at the time of this recording, I saw that SAF is engaging in battles in Al-Ubayd in North Kordofan with the RSF, another besieged city by the RSF. So this is still a very long way to go. And even if you look at it in terms of rebuilding, in terms of people's lives going back to normal, I think that even that is sort of a long way to go. We have a lot to do. But as a person who has a very direct connection to Khartoum, I won't deny that I was happy that the RSF was kicked out. But like Dallia said, as a person who's also removed, I'm in the diaspora, and I was not in Sudan when the war broke out. I haven't been in Sudan for quite some time. But so as a person who is removed, I have the luxury of looking at the full picture and not being sucked into the actual situation of that, like being able to look at the entirety of Sudan and consider the war within the context of the entirety of Sudan and not just Khartoum.
Yeah, I appreciate that note, because I think it's something that is neglected or like not examined when it's discussed as this. It is a victory. It's not the victory or the and I think in previous conversations, or I've heard, I think Saros speak about, Khartoum centricism, in that kind of, especially within Sudan, as though Khartoum, the main city, is the country. And I think, Dallia, I saw you post something someone had written about that, claiming this as a victory or an end of the war, as in Sudan is no bigger than Khartoum, is how we got here to begin with. I think you posted something like that I found very interesting, as in the neglect of the regions or the kind of emphasis only on what happens at Khartoum. is part of the problem that like bred the RSF to begin with. But anyway, I think we have a lot to dig in there. I do just want to note that I really appreciate this because I think that discourse exists very strongly in Lebanon as well. That the war is considered to have, is over, or with the Israeli aggression, because the main capital, the main city, isn't being bombed, even though in the last week they've bombed it twice. But all throughout this period, it's been pretty constant in the south, and like renewed kind of occupation. And so I definitely always appreciate both of yours emphasis on like decentering Khartoum, recognizing it as one city, one of the biggest and very important one, but not synonymous with the country as a whole. So I think on that point, I think it could be really helpful just to take a moment to kind of outline for people who may not be as informed of the war in general that started 2 years ago. Who is the RSF? The SAF is the Sudanese army, but who is el-Burhan? Maybe why this all started, even though I think that'd be searching way too far back. But whatever overview you'd want to give of like, because again, like we're saying, it's not over. It's not a complete victory, and so the war still exists, very much so in Darfur and, as you're saying, Kordofan. And so, yeah, if either of you would like to talk about the bigger context, the longer context, but also presently as well.
Yeah, so I mean, in a nutshell, the war began on April 15, 2023, between SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, and the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. It started in Khartoum and very quickly spread to other parts of the country, and very soon engulfed pretty much the majority of the country, with the exception of the northern and eastern states. And SAF and the RSF were on the same side previous to the war. The RSF is a paramilitary group that was created by the Bashir government, or I should say legitimized by the Bashir government in 2013. Before that, they were the Janjaweed, who are infamous, I think world infamous, who committed war crimes in Darfur alongside SAF. In fact, they were, sort of hired, quote unquote, by SAF, by the Bashir government to do their bidding in Darfur and other places in Sudan subsequently. And so when we talk about the war, it's very difficult for people, I think, who are from the outside looking in to understand. People are usually looking for a good guy, bad guy scenario. And here it's a little bit murky in terms of who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. Although in the last 2 years, I think the RSF has outdone itself in presenting this bad guy image. There is no good at all in what the RSF does. So yeah, I think maybe Dallia can get into sort of the deeper history, but I will say that I'll say that Sudanese people have been put in a very difficult position of having to choose. And many, if not most people, have chosen the side of the army despite a history of the army being wielded against the people. Certainly in marginalized areas like Darfur, like the Kordofans, people have seen really the bad side of the Sudanese military. And in terms of using it as part of the state apparatus to control dissent, to stamp down on rebellion and revolution in 2018 and 2019 and before that, I think Sudanese people have seen a lot of bad from the Sudanese military, but now they see them as really their only hope.
Yeah. I will say this. I mean, I've seen the war being described as a civil war, being described as a proxy war, being described as a war between two generals. End of the day, it's a war on civilians. I mean, those are the civilians, the people are the ones who are paying the very hefty price of this war. Whether Burhan is sitting fine in Port Sudan, Hemeti is sitting fine in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and they're unleashing hell on the civilians, whether it's from the aerial bombardments, whether it's from the violations, the conflict-related sexual violations, on women and girls, whether it's the forced inscription to the army in regards to the RSF, whether it's absolute, withholding aid from reaching people in besieged areas. I'm so sorry. There's so many factors at play, but it is the civilians who are paying the very hefty price. And the history of Sudan is we come in so many shapes and sizes and faces and skin tones and so on. And all these different aspects have been used throughout our history by those in power for their own benefit. So, for example, if today al-Hilu decided to side with the RSF, 10 years ago, for example, he was against the Bashir government, and so was Minnawi and Jibril, who are from, they come from Darfur, and they're now with the allied forces that are fighting with SAF. 10 years ago, they were fighting the very same army. So it's this mix, and it's basically who will rub your back, who will give you what you want. And so the problem is, yes, it is RSF versus SAF, but even within those two groups, you have a huge umbrella that covers so many different ethnic tribes, armies, political parties, political personalities. And I can understand why people have difficulty in understanding or getting to grips to what this war is about. But at the end of the day, this is a war that is being supported by various actors, whether they're regional, whether they're neighboring countries, or whether they're from far-flung areas. And they are ensuring that this war continues. At the same time, we have no one championing the war. When I say championing, as in talking about the war, saying, what, this war, we need to find a solution, or we need to find a reason, we need to find something. No one is doing that for Sudan. No one is doing that for the Sudanese. We're actually doing it ourselves. But we are, in essence, talking in this vacuum, in an echo chamber, because what I'm saying, it's what Sarah, for example, is hearing and saying as well. But the powers that be who can actually have some form of influence to bring about, and not necessarily an end to this war, but to bring about some semblance of, comprehension or understanding, have no interest in it. And those who are meddling in this war, in Sudan, they're doing it because it benefits them. Sudan, in terms of geography, the location is, access to West Africa, the Red Sea. And in terms of resources, it goes without saying, we are rich in so many resources. And it is these resources that are actually now being used against us. The smuggling of gold has not stopped since day one of the war. The smuggling of gum arabic, which Sudan, produces 80% of the world's supply, is still being smuggled. It's still being sold to the likes of the Coca-Cola company and the Mars Confectionery Company and I don't know what. And that money is being used to actually ensure that the war continues. They're buying weapons with it. There's an arms embargo over Darfur, but the arms are still being smuggled in through Chad. So where's the embargo there? Where's the sanctioning of those who break these, embargoes? Where's the sanctioning of anyone who's actually ensuring that this war continues? And I go back to the fact that this is a war on civilians, because it is us who are being impacted. And yes, SAF can be classified as the good guy because they're not the ones who have taken over people's homes. They're not the ones who've looted companies or who have, gone on rape campaigns against the women, so many violations that the RSF is guilty of. But that does not absolve SAF, because let's not forget those two were bed partners. On the 21st of October 2021, these two generals staged a coup to ensure that any semblance of a civilian government would not take place. And that partnership or that relationship was doomed to break up anytime soon. And this is the result. And people need to remember that. And us Sudanese, we need to remember that. SAF, yes, it is our national army. It is a state entity but it is there to support us, to protect us. It has not done that. But for the duration of this war, let it be. If people would rather support SAF, fine. But we also need to always keep remembering the fact that SAF has never fought for us, never fought for our corner as civilians.
Yeah, I also think that history is being rewritten. Like this war has given SAF or the Sudanese government the perfect opportunity to rewrite history and sort of reform the narrative to their benefit. If you look at the discourse online, if you even look at the discourse in the media, I think there is a deliberate campaign to sort of erase the coup, to erase what happened during the revolution. Even if you look at like the June 3rd massacre, which is the biggest, recent crime against the Sudanese people, that the fact that, now it's being painted as the RSF was the only one to carry out the June 3rd massacre of the Khartoum sit-in, which is not true. Even if we were to assume that is the case, the fact that the military did not protect the people in that moment, that the sit-in was taking place in front of the military headquarters, and that the gates were closed to people on that day. They were not allowed to come in and seek shelter on that day. I think like all of this stuff is being very meticulously smoothed over, erased. Over the last 2 years, there has been such a shift. And a few days ago, the 29th of Ramadan, was the 6th anniversary of the Khartoum sit-in massacre. And, it is competing with now the liberation of Khartoum and like this green for Sudan and green representing SAF and like all this stuff. I think, it's hard not to look at the war as an opportunity for SAF and the Sudanese government. It's very hard not to look at it in that light. But like Dallia said, I think we owe it to ourselves to remember. We owe it to ourselves to keep the record straight. It's very difficult to do so at this point because of, such an intense campaign and because of what people have been through as well under the RSF. There's been so much horror is not even the word. Like we're talking about crimes against humanity. It's indescribable amounts of terror that the people have experienced, and we don't even know, the full extent of it. So it's hard with all of that in mind to also remember a history that is going to repeat itself if we don't do something about it and if we don't keep it in mind. So it's, to me, I think we're in very scary times because, even if we were to look at this liberation of Khartoum being the beginning of the end, as people are saying right now, the beginning of the end of the war, what does that mean for us in the future? What does that mean for us in a world where SAF is the winner? And we are now, I mean, even if you look at sort of the recent developments government-wise, the fact that they've rewritten the constitutional agreement, the amendments that have been made to keep SAF in power, the statements by Yasser al-Ata, who is like the second in command pretty much of that SAF is not going anywhere, that we're gonna be controlling the country from now on because this is what's best for the country. I think when you look at that, it's looking like scary times is what I'm gonna say.
But that very same language is being repeated by Sudanese.
For sure. For sure.
That's the scary part for me. That I mean, I get where the army is coming from. That's been their aim since day one. But to hear it from people who were with me or with us when we were protesting against al-Bashir's government, we were all screaming, Hurriya, Salam, Adala, peace, justice, and accountability. Hurriya, Salam, Adala. freedom, yeah.
Freedom, peace,
And
and
they're now
justice. Yeah.
saying, this is, nothing will work in a country like Sudan unless you have a strong army, strong government, and only the army can protect us, and they're the only ones who can defeat the RSF. So it's
There's
very
a
disheartening, and it's narrowing the space for people like ourselves, like myself and Sarah and others, who stand there and say, no, we need to remember, we need to look back and make sure that the mistakes that were made in before, where we compromised, where we agreed on situations where we knew deep down this was actually, a poisonous chalice, but we still went for it. So, but no, now, and I get that they're going through a war, but if this war doesn't make us wake up and realize, what, if we keep repeating the same mistakes, we're going to have not just another war, we're going to have wars, and it will
Right.
never be a never-ending story, then that's just beyond frightening for me.
Yeah.
And I will say this, for people like myself and like Sarah and so many others, we will no longer be welcomed. We
Oh,
will
for
no longer
sure.
be welcomed to even state our case or present our case anymore, because we will be seen as some people who are treacherous or people who are unpatriotic and so on and so forth. And in those voices are getting louder, and they're getting bigger. They're being given more space to say that.
Yeah.
And space for ourselves is shrinking. Civic society, especially, I'm seeing it now in Sudanese civic society. The space is getting narrower and narrower, and it's very scary. People are being compromised, people are being co-opted, people are being threatened. Whether it's online, whether it's face to face, whether it's lists being given out saying these people, collaborated with the RSF and they need to be dealt with, whatever dealing with them means. So that to me is one of the scariest parts. So as a society, where do we go from here? How can we ensure that we can move forward and somehow not fall back into the trap of being pulled into a conflict, into a war where we have no say, we have no power, and we end up paying the price for it time and time again. That's my biggest worry.
And how do we come back from the militarization of society? How do we come back from, how do we come back to a peacetime society where the gun is not ruling, where people don't you know, solve their differences through violence? I think that's also one of the things. Because looking at how, like you said, Dallia, civic society is being silenced, how voices that call for peace are now seen as treacherous or as collaborators with the RSF. I think that's all pointing towards a very violent society. And I don't know how we come back from that without sort of an intentional, deliberate plan to.
I mean, I look
right.
at cases like, sorry, Ayman, no, sorry.
Sorry, yeah,
No,
we're going on a whole
no, I love
tangent.
this actually. I just like actually curating a conversation between the two of you. That's if you want to keep going, I'm happy to. I just wanted to bring up because or rather tie some of the strings together unless you want to go in a certain direction.
No, go for it.
No, go ahead.
Because
Um,
we can go on and not stop. Absolutely.
and we're trying to aim for like shorter episodes with this podcast. So maybe I should. But because there's something, I mean, first of all, thank you for bringing in everything that you're bringing into this conversation. There's definitely a lot. We're not just talking about a war, and even any war. It's always like so many different sides and so many different interests, and it's true. It's the people that uh, I'd say, I mean, caught in the middle, but also this is definitely intentionally like this did start to me very explicitly as a counter-revolutionary war, which sort of starts with the coup, but like, and again, all in the context of a very powerful, very widespread, very like, to me, inspirational, still inspirational, popular movement that advocates for like the transformations of power. Um, I never got the impression from the Sudanese revolution and the Sudanese revolutionaries and the charters they were coming out with that there was just this sort of simple attempt at like seizing power. It was this demand to transform it, and so I haven't looked that closely into the current discourse, and it's quite upsetting to hear, because I remember a couple of years ago, like one of the hashtags that I was seeing was like the RSF or the Janjaweed disband and the army back into the barracks. But obviously, like you were saying, in the last 2 years, the RSF has done indescribable crimes that is sort of just like innately propaganda for the SAF in terms of like who else is going to protect you from this genocidal militia. But so the rewriting of the history, I think, is a really important point, and maybe we can examine it a bit further, only because, again, one of the things that the revolutionaries in the resistance committees in Sudan did that I found like indescribable, and I've never seen anything like it, are the charters, the revolutionary charters. And one of the most incredible things for me is the intent, like the intentiveness, or like the strategy of sitting down and collectively writing a people's history. Because you look at the sort of official statement, like histories and the regime narrative of Sudan, it's, you know, kind of built towards, and therefore we should have Omar Bashir, you know what I mean? Whereas to rewrite the history or to like re-examine it in light of this revolutionary moment, I found that really powerful. And then the democratic way in which that document was created and shared and spread and in all the regions. So it's, I mean, that's another loss. That's very upsetting to hear about. And there is a kind of motto, a phrase, or whatever, that one of the first victims of war is the truth. And so I guess then, if I have a question there, it's that, so you're describing that the civic space is shrinking, but what of the civic space that still exists? I know during the occupation of Khartoum, places under RSF control, people weren't able to speak up as much. A lot of these resistance committees were still active, mostly for like urgent, you know, burials and medical things and food shelters. But in terms of that sort of discursive, even strategically, do you see any of that that's like not just standing the SAF of like,
Well, I mean, in regards to civic society and the youth, I mean, you just have to look at all the summits and all the meetings that have been held in regards to the war in Sudan and how much space at the table were given to these youth groups and to the women groups and to all civic society in general. Very small spaces were allotted to them. End of the day, it was still pretty much the politicians, the age-old politicians that we all know, and those who represent both warring armies. And I agree with you in this. The coup was definitely counter-revolutionary, and the war is, in a way, it is, because we've heard this rhetoric. No one ever talked to me again. I've seen videos of SAF soldiers that like they would be standing in front of, they're like, revolution, what revolution? It's only SAF from now on. It's already, the message is being sent out, the drip drip effect. Like when you keep repeating something, pretty soon people will start, repeating it and believing in it. So yes, I mean, the civilian politician side is pretty much broken, because I've always said, on paper, Taqaddum was our best hope on paper, because they represented the side that was neither this or that, but they failed. They failed to actually take that opportunity given to them and do something with it. And as a result, Taqaddum has split, and some of them went and set up the parallel government with the RSF. So it's politically wise, we're in a complete mess. And at the same time, outside parties, like the UK is having a ministerial conference on the 15th of April to talk about Sudan. The UAE is invited. I mean, what can I say? And 5 days before that, the ICJ will open proceedings on the case that Sudan has brought against the UAE, you know? So it's so bad you can't help but laugh because it's
Yeah.
just unbelievable how messy it is and there's no clear-cut answer. That's my problem, that there's nothing we can grab a hold on to and say, okay, this is what we need to do. But I will always come back and say, my hope is always on the youth, because they proved themselves even before the revolution when they started laying the groundwork for the 2019 revolution.
Yeah.
And how they pivoted once war broke out into being these life-saving humanitarian frontliners.
Mm-hmm.
Stepping in where the state had collapsed, they stepped in and they ensured that with what little they had, they would make it work. And so my belief is that, when the war comes to an end, inshallah, I don't know when, they will still have that foundation that they've always had, in which they can pivot back to it and use it, and I don't think they are compromised in general. I think the youth, whether they're the emergency room responders, whether they're the frontliners or whether their essence is still there, and that they will continue to build on, and that they will not agree to the status quo that's been placed on, as in, this is how it's going to be, that they will resist it and they will fight against it. And if that happens, then that's our only ray of hope for me. That's how I see how we can get out of this quagmire that we're in. And everything is very murky, everything is very blurred right now. But that's the only shining light that I see for me, is those youth, those revolutionary activists who, throughout everything that's been happening, they have been steadfast and they have done what no other person has been able to do.
For sure. I think it does a great disservice when we look at Sudan's war as just one thing. I think people are looking for it to either be a civil war or a proxy war or a counter-revolutionary war, when in reality, it is a mix of those things. I mean, I personally don't agree with the civil war narrative at all, because civilians have been the main victims and have nothing to do with this. But I think it is a mix of it being a proxy war and a counter-revolutionary war and a war between two generals. It started as a war between two generals and grew into all of the things we're talking about. And it started as a war between two generals because they were both in cahoots to destroy the revolution and the result and the possible results of the revolution, like hindering any possible result of the revolution. And so, the saddest thing to me is seeing, I mean, sad and also incredibly impressive and hopeful and inspirational to see the youth who gave their lives, in terms of like their futures and also their actual lives for this revolution, for this struggle, seeing them now pivot not just to become the emergency response rooms and the humanitarian responders and the only people who are actually caring for civilians, but also being on the front lines of the war itself and having what they call the revolutionary battalions, who are people who were out in the street, facing SAF, facing the RSF, facing the state apparatus with nothing but their bodies, right? Completely peaceful, nonviolent, trying to fight for the demands of the revolution that they were making since 2018 and before, now come and fight alongside SAF against the RSF, seeing that the RSF is, threatening the country's existence, period. And so to me, I think that's extremely commendable, to be able to put your ideological differences. I mean, it's more than an ideological difference. These people were trying to kill you, right? To put all of that aside and fight alongside them for your own survival and for the survival, obviously, of your country. And all the while repeating the thing of, once this war is over, we are going back to the streets to protest, to demand the things that we were asking for all along, that we warned about this very thing happening. Now we're here fixing it with you / for you, right? And don't think that we're going to forget what we were demanding. That to me is an incredible thing that I haven't seen anywhere. And I'm praying that there's follow through. I'm praying that there will be an environment that will allow even a sliver of that follow through to happen. That's something that I think nobody's talking about. And when, especially, outside people are looking at this war in Sudan, this is something that none of them are discussing. Nobody's clocking this. And that's crazy to me. But it also shows an ignorance of Sudan's context and ignorance of Sudan's history, just Sudan's recent history of like 5, 6, 10 years ago, that people are not, a lot of things are missed. A lot of stuff falls through the cracks because of people's ignorance about Sudan. And the last thing I want to say is about our political parties, our political figures. I think their main issue is that they have lost the confidence of the Sudanese people a long time ago. The people's lack of confidence and lack of trust and belief in political parties and the political figures that are presenting themselves as representatives of the Sudanese people, that's been happening for years, even before the revolution. And the revolution gave them a little bit of a step up, a little bit of an opportunity to prove themselves. And I think post-coup, that all fell apart. And so now when we see collectives like Taqaddum or whoever else speaking about the future of Sudan or trying to plan for a post-war Sudan, the people are not even listening. Like they're irrelevant at this point. And to me, I think that's a good thing, because it's those same figures have been there for a long time, and it's time for new blood. It's time for the youth who have actually put foot to pavement, put their money and their bodies where their mouth is, or who are doing the work, walking the walk and talking the talk. Those are the people who I'm looking to for leadership and guidance for the future of Sudan, because those are the people who are intimately knowledgeable about what Sudan needs in the future, that are not disconnected because they are in it, because they have been in it this entire time.
I agree with you, but will they be given the space to be able to do that?
Right.
That's the problem. That is the big problem. It's not just our political players who are keeping them out. It's also members of the international community.
For sure.
Absolutely. Every single, I think, I'm trying to think of any meeting that was done for Sudan or conference where they were the front and center of that discussion, and they never were. And
No,
yet
and
they're
even
the
if
ones, yeah.
Yeah, even if you look at the last 2 years and you see, for example, discussions about the emergency response rooms, we're just talking about it through that little small scope of the
Yeah.
emergency response rooms. Come, youth, talk to us about what you're doing on the ground, but not, hey, youth, come talk to us about how you were warning us this entire time that this exact thing was going to happen. Or come tell us about your envisionment for the future of Sudan. That's not happening. We're just
Remember
looking
when
at the
they
youth as
tried?
bodies that are serving. That's it.
No, remember when they tried to do that during the transitional period discussions with the UNIMIS and so on? And they were, I think someone actually came
Yeah.
out and said the youth are too idealistic and they don't have enough experience
Yeah.
to
They should
talk
aim
or
lower.
to,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was, I mean, I remember reading that and I was like, are you effing kidding me? Seriously? And then they come and tell you the youth are the future,
Right.
invest in your
Right.
youth, and then I'm like, well,
But
and these youth
right.
actually present, like you said, they had charters, they put themselves out there, they knew because they lived it.
Yeah.
Unlike some diplomat who flew in first class. These youth lived under the 30 years rule of Omar al-Bashir. They lived after, some of them, when you have someone as young as 10 years old having more understanding of the nuances of Sudanese politics than a seasoned politician or diplomat, that says a lot about the
Yeah.
international community.
But
I
it's
mean,
also
it's
the chronic underestimating of not only the youth, but also of African people. You
oh
can't
yeah,
possibly
absolutely.
comprehend what's happening to you. You can't have an enlightened, new, innovative vision for your life because what do you know? You've lived under dictatorship
Yeah.
for all this time, and also this is how your life should go. So that's why they told us to aim lower, because that's all they envisioned for us.
Yeah.
They couldn't even envision a better future for us. So I'm not surprised that the youth are being underestimated or dismissed. And I think it's going to keep happening. But to me, I think it's the it puts us in a position of having, in my opinion, to put them, as we say, بالعربي أمام الأمر الواقع. If we are able in Sudan, if the youth are able in Sudan to cement their position as the people who should be speaking for the Sudanese populace, who are the people who are supposed to be building Sudan's future and having a say in Sudan's future, the world is going to fall in line. We need to be in a position where we're not giving them the choice. You have to fall in
We
line.
don't need their permission to do it. We should
Right,
just do it.
right.
Yeah.
My concern is less with how the international community is going to deal with it, but how domestically we are going to deal with it post-war. How domestically the powers that be or the government or the state apparatus is going to handle it when the youth come and say, hey, the war is over. Thanks for everything. However, we have a nation to rebuild and we don't like how you're doing things. How is that going to play out? Because I think right now SAF and the Sudanese government are resting, you know, sitting back thinking, oh, we've got this in the bag. Once the war is over, people are just going to fall in line and they're going to support us regardless. And they're going to want us to be here regardless. But there's plenty of youth who are waiting for the opportunity to get back on the street, who are waiting for the opportunity to say, no more of that. So what is that going to happen? How is that going to play out? And then I guess, what is the world going to do when that plays out? Are they just going to let it happen, or are they going to see that a pattern is reoccurring?
I don't know. I mean, I keep mentioning the international community because for me, I realize that you can't do something on your own. Even if you
Yeah,
want to do it, if you want to do it isolated from everyone else, it's impossible to do that. And we're in a position right now where every little help, goes a long way. And if that
right.
means them, supporting the youth, if that will bring something, achieve something, then I'm all for it. Because I have no trust in the domestic players. I have no trust in the regional players, nor in our friendly neighbors. I have no trust in the international community either. But there's maybe checks and balances system that can actually work in our favor somehow. But I will go back and say there's no one championing Sudan. There's no one championing the youth. That
Yeah,
needs to happen. That definitely, and if someone is coming out of war, I think the last thing anyone will want to be here is salam, hurriya, adala.
yeah,
What they'd be wanting to hear is, do I have electricity in my house? Is there
yeah.
water in the tap? Am I able to buy food from the market for my family?
Safety,
How can
security,
I keep them
stability.
safe? Exactly. This is what people are looking for. And
Yeah,
speaking to Sudanese here with us in Egypt, this is what they all want. They're like, I just want
yeah,
a man. I
yeah,
want a man. Everything else, they're like, no, no, don't talk to me about politics. Don't talk to
yeah,
me about this. This is what they want. And this is what I think the likes of SAF will be playing into. And
for sure.
they already are. Like you see
Mm-hmm.
all the videos, where they liberate an area and everyone's coming out like, I feel safe now. And I get it. I can imagine, having lived under the RSF, I can't even imagine. So I understand. So it's a very rocky road ahead of us, and how we'll be able to navigate it, I have no clue. But this is where the likes of us, the likes others, the likes of the youth, where we have to have a plan. We have to have a post-war plan. We can't wait for the war to end and then to start planning. The plan has to
Mhm.
start being put in place from now, as
For
to,
sure.
and in this case, I think we need to look at other examples of where countries like Sudan went through what we've been gone through, or even worse. How did they navigate it?
Mm-hmm.
And pick and choose what suits us best, because not every glove fits every hand, so to speak. So what
Right.
worked in Rwanda might not work for us, but we can get something from them. What happened in Cote d'Ivoire, what happened in so many other countries that have lived, Bosnia, so that have lived through horrific times in their recent history, and we learn from that, and we try to adapt what works with us. That's the only thing I can think of that we can actually do at this moment in time. But we have to have a plan B. We have to have a plan
Yeah,
post-war. What's going to happen? Absolutely.
for
There have
sure.
been a few things in this conversation that obviously I'm connecting with Lebanon because I'm from there, and it's just I've been seeing parallels for like we also have like a very similar parallel timeline in terms of like revolution and economic collapse and whatever. But also in the sort of like simple narratives. Um, I remember saying to Sada like a couple of years ago that like my feeling about like or I asked you about a kind of like this double-edged sword of having international attention.
Mm-hmm.
Because like and definitely I've seen a lot of it since that like a lot of people are talking about Lebanon. But with that comes a tremendous amount of bullshit and of simplistic narratives
Yeah.
and really just like bullshit where it's like that does not reflect at all my reality, our country. But anyway, I'm also now thinking a bit more about Syria as well, as a situation of,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a counter-revolutionary war that does get seen as like a civil war because it's a lot of like internal things. And some of the images that we're seeing now from Khartoum, I have a friend of mine who has just gone back to Syria for the first time in 18 years, and she's sending us back for like pictures from Damascus, and it's harrowing, and it's again what we've been seeing in Gaza as well, like just like the entire neighborhoods, buildings, completely just the skeletons of it, and it's the things that are sort of left behind. But again, in that same situation, I mean, it's been a few months since the fall of Assad. It's obviously, like you said, Dahlia, like no two situations are the same. We can only like look at parts of it. Um, but there is a return to civic life and to civic activism, and people, are protesting Shara, uh, protesting the UN. Like there's like sort of engagement. Um, but just thinking in terms of time, I think we should slowly wrap things up. I think one question that I think is very important is where would you push people to learn more about this? Where can they show their solidarity? Definitely like I can put things in the show notes about like the community kitchens or um, so yeah, if you have anything that you'd like to sort of plug in that way or recommend to people to follow, aside
I
from your
would plug
Instagram
Sarah.
page. Yeah.
I would plug Sarah because she has been relentless in pushing and advocating for fund GoFundMe's, and it's incredible. I don't know where she gets the energy to do it, but say mashallah alayki, honestly, mashallah alayki. So I would say follow Sarah, because she can suss out those who are fake and those who are authentic appeals for help, especially the community kitchens and individuals. So follow Sarah especially on Twitter. It's uh it's a horrible place to be in at the moment, but there
It's
are
the
some
worst.
limelights, and Sarah's posts are one of them. So definitely. And there's also like the Sudan Solidarity Fund, I think, and there's
Yeah,
mutual
Sudan
aid
Solidarity
for
Collective.
Sudan.
Yeah.
There's also mutual aid for Sudan, and yeah, there's plenty. But Sarah knows them all, so I would plug Sarah and say follow her. She will
Uh,
lead you down the correct path for sure.
I would say that I would repeat what Dalia said at the beginning of this episode, which is that this is a war against civilians, that civilians are paying the ultimate price for what's happening in Sudan right now and are continuing to do so. So if I were to plug anything, it's that civilians need your support. Beyond what you're looking for as a person from the outside looking in, you're looking for a side to support the civilians. You don't have to worry about the warring factions. You don't have to worry about all the intricacies, because at the end of the day, this is a humanitarian disaster. Regardless of what the politics of it is, how we got here, it is the largest humanitarian disaster in recorded history. So the civilians are the ones who deserve and need your help. I also want to say that earlier, just now we were talking about the international community. When we talk about the international community, we're talking about world governments. We're not talking about people. And I think people conflate those two. When we talk about we need your support for Sudan, people are saying, but you don't want the international community meddling. And those are two separate things. The politics of what happens, the entity that is called the international community is completely different from the world. Those are separate, they operate separately, they have different agendas, and the international community's agenda is to keep itself in that position of power, and has nothing to do with what me, you, Ayman, Dalia, all the regular people of the world are experiencing. So I urge solidarity between people. And Sudan right now needs your solidarity as a person of the world. There's community kitchens that need support. There's individual families that need support, but also you helping us get the word out to other regular people like yourself. That in itself is solidarity and support. People understanding what Sudanese people are going through, seeing what Sudanese people are going through and acknowledging it, that is a form of solidarity and support. And it is also a very lucrative, powerful form of currency that we can use to pressure the international community. So yeah, I'll share some links with you, Ayman, of organizations and funds that folks can support, and even accounts that people can follow to get more educated, for sure.
Yeah, please do. And where can listeners follow both of you?
I am at BS on Blast everywhere.
Everywhere as in Instagram,
Everywhere. Twitter,
TikTok.
Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky.
Okay. Are you on Mastodon?
No, I am
No.
not. I have actually no idea what that is.
Oh, I don't know. It's like Fediverse thing. I don't.
Oh,
It's
yeah, I
it's
have.
one of the alternatives for Twitter when he bought it,
Oh,
and so
okay. I hopped on the Blue Sky train
yeah, yeah.
when people were exodusing out of Twitter.
And
Dahlia,
then
what about
people
you?
came back on the Twitter train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. I'm Dallia DALLIAASD on Twitter, and I think I'm the same thing on Instagram. But my Instagram is very frivolous. It's my escape. It's my form of escapism from the
Need it.
horrors, from the
Yeah.
reality that I read and live every day. So Instagram is more frivolous, but Twitter is where I get my information and I share information. And I think that's where the vast majority of Sudanese are
Mm,
as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, especially post-revolution, we all jumped on the Twitter bandwagon. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, I learned about both of you on Twitter back in the good old days.
Yeah.
Uh, well, thank you both so much for joining us. And thank you everyone for listening. If you like this episode, please consider. Sorry, I need to figure out how to do this without it seeming strange with you both here and me just talking. It's fine.
It's okay. Just go
I'll
for
do
it.
it. This has been another episode of the From the Periphery podcast. If you like this podcast and the work we do, where we center and elevate voices from the global south, please consider heading over to our Patreon. Patreon.com/from the periphery. It'll be in the show notes, obviously. And yeah, become a member, join our community, and help us do more episodes like this. So Sado, Dalio, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.